And we will start this morning in New York, where amid mounting legal trouble across multiple states, former President Donald Trump could be criminally charged for the first time as early as this week. According to 5 senior officials familiar with the plans, federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies are discussing security measures ahead of a possible indictment from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. This is in connection with a hush money payment the former president allegedly made to porn star Stormy Daniels in the closing days of the 2016 campaign to keep her quiet about an affair she claims to have had with Trump back in 2006. Trump denies having an affair with Daniels and any wrongdoing. Although we are told law enforcement's plans are precautionary, Trump claimed on social media over the weekend that he would be arrested on Tuesday. In that same post, he also called for protests to, quote, take our nation back, drawing comparisons to his calls for violence in the lead up to the January 6th insurrection. Despite those claims, a Trump spokesperson tells NBC News that the former president has not been notified about a possible arrest. As a precaution, however, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg told his staff in an internal memo over the weekend that he would, quote, not tolerate attempts to intimidate our office or threaten the rule of law. In fact, Bragg is continuing with his investigation even as talk of an indictment reaches a fever pitch. Today, a one-time legal advisor to former Trump attorney Michael Cohen, Robert Costello, says he will testify before the grand jury in the case. A person with direct knowledge of the situation says Trump's own attorneys asked the DA's office to have Costello testify. Cohen also confirmed yesterday on MSNBC that he was asked to make himself available to the DA's office as a rebuttal witness to Costello's testimony. Cohen denies that Costello ever represented him. And Joe, I just think it's worth reminding everybody that Donald Trump, if you think about what he posted on Truth Social and these calls to take the country back, is the same guy who said, run to the Capitol, run, go there now, I'll meet you there. And he never did.
Right, same guy who watched gleefully for several hours while violence was being let loose by rioters on the Capitol, police officers being bludgeoned and just brutally hurt. 4 later died that were there that day. I wonder though. There's been a lot of let's just say amateur lawyering going on news networks over the weekend. I want to bring in somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, Chuck Rosenberg. Chuck, let's talk about what crimes could Donald Trump could be charged with. I hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, this is much ado about nothing." All I will say is that when I held events as running for federal office, if I had 20 volunteers together and somebody bought the barbecue from Sonny's Barbecue, if I didn't report that $30, $50, $60 in-kind contribution, that was a violation. And if it's serious enough, I could be charged for a federal crime. In this case, you have Cohen making a $130,000 hush money payment to a porn star at Donald Trump's request. He's repaid double, not by the campaign, but by the Trump organization. None of this is reported on FEC reports. And when I hear people saying this is much ado about nothing, I think about all the members of Congress I served with and understanding every single one of them would have been charged and sent to jail had they done this.
Yeah, Joe, it's a fair point. So let's be clear. This is a state investigation, and so it would be a state crime, not a federal one. But I take your point, and here's how it works. It's not the hush money payment that's illegal. That may seem improper, it may be vile, but it's not illegal. What would be illegal is the way you treat that hush money payment on your books and records. So if you're really paying the money to Stormy Daniels to have her remain quiet about an extramarital affair, and then you characterize that payment on your books and records as a legal retainer for Mr. Cohen, those are false business entries, and New York State has made that a crime, a misdemeanor. Now, if you commit that crime in order to conceal some other crime, to your point, Joe, an election law violation, a false reporting, then that can also be a felony under New York State law. So it seems like potentially a misdemeanor coupled with a felony, all related to the same operative acts, falsely characterizing the hush money payments as a legal retainer. That's the offense.
Michael Cohen got sent to jail for being part of this scheme. Why?
Well, he pled guilty to, I believe, 8 felonies under federal law, and not just this scheme. There was a tax scheme. He had made false statements. So there were more and more serious offenses to which he pled guilty. This is a narrower piece of what he pled guilty to. Now, he had an integral role, if he is to be believed, in the Trump hush money, false bookkeeping caper. But he, Cohen, pled guilty to many more offenses, and that was in the federal system, not in the state system.
You say if he is to be believed, would this case concern you if you were bringing it as a prosecutor?
You know, yes and no. I mean, look, if you want to know how libraries work, you talk to librarians. If you want to know how crimes work, you talk to criminals. And so there's nothing at all unusual about having a criminal as a witness at another criminal trial. The key, Joe, is how well you can corroborate that person's testimony. Are there other witnesses? Are there other documents? The answer here, based on public reporting, seems to be yes, that there's plenty of corroboration for what Michael Cohen will testify to a trial. That said, you have to be careful when you put a witness on the stand who has a motive for revenge. And Michael Cohen has said many times he would like to get Donald Trump in one way or another. So does it concern me? Yes. Have I done things like that? Sure. How do I do it? Carefully and with corroboration.
John Meacham, at the end of the day, the overriding principle seems to be that no man is above the law. Donald Trump has seemed to be above the law, not only during his presidency, but also during his life. Are you going to be wringing your hands if he ends up only getting charged with a misdemeanor and they don't have the felony count stick? Or do we still believe that no man is above the law, regardless of whether they're an ex-president or an accountant or a lawyer or a construction worker?
Well, you know, you think about it, there are 2 different tracks here. There's the legal track that you and Chuck are talking about, and there's the political track. And as much as we would like those 2 to be entwined, they aren't. And so one of the great questions for the next couple of weeks, and Mika alluded to at the top, is A, whether this has led to yet another example of Trump-inspired political violence. That's one question as this process goes forward. The other is, in this polarized time, does it matter politically? Legally, it's a different thing. But politically, does anybody who's on the fence about Donald Trump, and I suspect there's a lot of room on the fence at this point, I would hope, will this matter to them? And I'm historically speaking and sort of sitting back and looking at it, what's troubling is that we've long been at a point where nothing seems to matter. Facts and traditional rules of gravity, traditional codes within American politics don't apply here. And I was thinking this weekend about there's a line in Thomas Paine, I can't remember if it's Common Sense or The American Crisis, but both before Yorktown, who says that in America, the law is king. The king is not the law is king. And that's true in that sphere. Politically, it's an unfolding and open question.